You just. All right, let's get started. We're good, Monica? All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I am Bessie Alcantara. I am the Executive Director for Alternatives. And don't want to take up too much time, but I do want to say that we have a couple of speakers today on the agenda that were not on the promo materials. We've gotten a lot of backlash for hosting this conversation, so I wanted to make sure that we kept people's both physical and emotional safety at the forefront of our minds. And so I'm going to introduce the first two speakers, and then Monica will introduce the third. And so we're just going to jump in and get started. And so the first two speakers are going to be Saeed and Christine, and I'm going to turn it over to Saeed.
Thank you, Bessie. Hello, everybody. My name is Saeed Rezko. I use they, them pronouns. First and foremost, I do want to thank everybody for being engaged in this conversation. It does mean a lot to me. And I want to share a little bit about my experience being Arab American in this country at this time and in the nonprofit world. So very brief context, I am specifically Syrian American, and Syria is a country that shares a border with the state of Israel. Syria has had land annexed through military force by Israel. Syria has been bombed by Israel in the last couple of months. And somewhat separately, Syria has also been experiencing its own war for over the past decade. And while these events have been really formative to me as a person, and also to how I experience the current ongoing violence in Palestine, it's also largely absent from American discourse and American awareness at large. And I want to speak to how isolating it is to exist in a space that has contributed to that violence, but is so unaware of it at the same time. And another thing I want to emphasize is like, this silence is not new, right? Like this has been the context of my entire existence in this country, and it just feels amplified at this moment. So something I want to speak to is kind of like the impact of silence and neutrality versus support in the workplace specifically, using myself and my siblings as an example. So my siblings work at the same company with each other. And previously, before the last couple of months, all three of us shared the same experience of feeling safe and supported at work, of feeling socially connected at work, feeling like our workplaces cared about us as people, which I feel like is pretty unique in workplaces today. But a couple months ago, I have noticed a divergence in our experiences based on the messaging that we've been receiving at work. My siblings received a statement from their CEO condemning the violence that occurred on October 7th, and then complete radio silence after that. There's been no condemnation about the violence against Palestine or about the civilian death toll in Gaza. And I've seen the shift occur in them over the past couple of months, where they don't know exactly who to trust with the feelings and experiences that they've been having. They don't feel as safe or supported at work. And I've seen that shift in how they relate to their work in their workplace. Compared with myself at Alternatives, a place that has created space for dialogue, that has discussed the history of Israel and Palestine and not discussed these as isolated events, and has also demonstrated other internal supports that have made me feel safe and supported at work. And that's something I want to highlight is I understand that not everything can be public, right? There are consequences, specifically for nonprofits that rely on year-to-year funding for public actions. But there are ways that you can make your employees feel supported internally, and that's something that I have felt. And I'm so grateful for that, because processing everything else that I'm experiencing feels like a job in and of itself. And I've been trying really hard to put into words what it has felt like. And I wrote a completely different 5 minutes that was just context, right? This is the history, this is what's been happening. And I do think that that's important. It's really relevant and it deeply informs how I experience everything. But it was also easier than telling you how I feel. And it's really hard to find the words to describe the human experience of war and the human experience of genocide and navigating a refugee system that would prefer you were dead. And for myself, being a descendant of people, some of whom survived those circumstances, some of whom have not survived those circumstances. And at the same time, having just the flood of content every single day. There are an innumerable amount of content of death and violence against people who look like my family members, who sound like my family. And I can't describe how dehumanizing it is to witness that on such a constant basis and to also experience that violence being justified and defended on such a global scale. But I also want to leave you on a little bit more of a positive note, right? I hope that what you can take away from this is, even if you had not heard of Syria or knew nothing about Syria before this, right? Your engagement, your involvement in this conversation is impactful. And even when we're not aware of each other, we are connected to each other and we do impact each other. And so your engagement is impactful, and I want to thank you for that. And thank you to Alternatives for organizing this as well. That's Christine.
Hi, my name is Christina. I use she, her pronouns. I work with Alternatives as a therapist. I'm a school-based therapist, so I work in a couple schools on the west side. I'm Palestinian. I'm also Pakistani. My mom's side is Palestinian. My grandparents were born in Haifa, Palestine, which is now fully occupied and considered Israel. In 1948, my grandparents left for Lebanon and Kuwait, and then came to the States. So, and that was during the invasion in Kuwait. So, classic diaspora experience of trauma, displacement, surviving different wars. So because of that, my aunt and my mom and my aunt and uncle were raised in Kuwait and have never been to Palestine. My brother, I kind of want to just explain the context of where I'm coming from, because Palestinians aren't a monolith at all. So my brother and sister-in-law do live in the West Bank. They've been there for 2.5 years, and they just had a baby there last week. So that being said, I did get to go to the West Bank last Christmas, which was, of course, like a very formative experience, and I've seen firsthand what checkpoints are at. I've been interrogated in the airport, even though I have a Christian name and American citizenship. Yeah, have been forever changed by that experience. I want to just talk about what it's been like, what it is like as a Palestinian. I mean, there's so much to share, but what it's like being in spaces where there's silence or neutrality, or even where some organizations are siding with the oppressor. And a little bit about my experience with alternatives in the past couple of months. But I grew up in very white evangelical spaces. So again, my experience is kind of random and unique in that way. But I'm very used to, I've been in a lot of spaces in schools and institutions and workplaces where I was one of the few people of color and kind of had that task of explaining, like defending myself, pushing back on ignorant comments, trying to explain how we're still impacted by racism and what that means. And so I've been very accustomed and traumatized by like feeling very other, feeling very unsafe in my own workplace, in my own classroom. And just, again, yeah, seeing that our rights in our community is up for debate. It's not a fun experience. And so being at Alternatives, it's definitely been such a gift and honor I feel very fortunate to be a part of this organization that has been very unapologetic in their stance. But I kind of, and I talked to Bessie about this beforehand, I want to talk about, there's kind of this pause, this gap of time between October 7th and until we kind of heard about Palestine from Alternatives, talking about, we're coming together to have a meeting about this and talk about what we want to say. And of course, I know now there's a lot going on behind the scenes, but I just want to share my experience of that silence and what Palestinians have been going through, just in interacting with the silence and the neutrality and just overwhelming statements. But yeah, in that time, we're flooded with content. We're seeing, like Saeed said, people who look like us, people who speak our language, completely massacred, dehumanized, in so much pain, physically, psychologically, being tortured, humiliated, losing our land. Our land is everything, homes, memories. I mean, it's so much to talk about, but there's a lot of vicarious trauma in taking those images in and seeing seeing the Nakba like right in front of us, seeing what our ancestors have been through. I'm traumatized by that. I'm feeling isolated. Like we're not sleeping, we're not eating, we're miserable, we're scared, and so you're kind of bracing for the worst. Like I had started Alternatives in March, and I didn't know where Alternatives stood with Palestine, and so in that time, like I knew we're progressive, we're very left, but as we've seen with other institutions and orgs, like it stops at Palestine, and you kind of have to brace for the worst. And at the same time, I'm seeing statements of a lot of propaganda, a lot of misinformation, just in public statements. You know, we're completely dehumanized. The word Palestine isn't even being used in statements. And I just kind of say all of that to say like that matters and that takes a toll on us. And yeah, so I'm ultimately very grateful to be a part of Alternatives, but in that time it did feel very isolating, overwhelming, and just like activating. So that's sort of what I'm sharing about my experience of that and the Palestinian experience. I want to emphasize that mine is like very small, and you know, Palestinians are not a monolith, and it really, part of the diaspora experience is that isolation and that disconnection from others. So I feel very grateful to be surrounded by other Palestinians at this time too, and I've kind of seen the statements they've received, kind of like what Saeed was mentioning of like with their siblings, and seeing how that has impacted them. And even though Alternatives made such an amazing statement, it's not like I haven't seen statements from other organizations and institutions or progressive Christian Black and brown people that I had followed for so long and looked up to, just feeling very disappointed and very hurt by, again, where Palestine becomes too controversial and too complicated to really stand for Palestinians. So yeah, in that time, you're seeing my friends are screenshotting statements and sending them to me. I'm seeing like, well, we're from Akron, so like LeBron James made a really frustrating statement and no mention of Palestine and very misinformed and no context and lots of propaganda. So you kind of just, again, assume the worst. So I'm very grateful for Alternatives and how we came together to talk about the occupation and the historical context and how important it is, like what solidarity with Palestine looks like. But yeah, that's a little my experience. Or just in organizations and institutions in general where there's silence and neutrality, and what that means for us and how that affects us and our community.
I wanted to make sure that I introduced our next speaker here, Dr. Levin, who has so generously agreed to be here with us today. She's an activist and a member of Jewish Voice for Peace. I will let her speak more to her experience and what that's been like over the last decade of her work. And without further ado, Dr. Rebecca Levin.
Thanks so much for having me. I think I was asked because I'm a Jew and because I also just came back from spending 5.5 weeks in Palestine. I went there to do work on the West Bank. I thought that I was going to be working in small villages around Ramallah, and then I arrived in Israel on October 7th. And when that happened, what the expectations were for me from my contacts in the activism world, they're shifted because while all eyes were on Gaza, all of this explosion of land theft and violence was taking place on the West Bank. And they asked if I would spend my time living and doing what is called protective presence work with Palestinian shepherds and their villages. So I lived in the villages for those 5 weeks. And it was, as Monica said, I've been doing this work for almost 30 years, but I had not done work actually on the ground in the West Bank or in Gaza. And it was time for me. I decided last spring, and that's why I went there. The experience is not something I can encapsulate in 10 minutes for you. It was extraordinarily violent. It was traumatic. It was frightening. It was also inspiring to see this notion of steadfastness, which is integral in the Palestinian community, lived, where you have people that are experiencing extraordinary violence and loss, as you were talking about, of community, of land, and yet being committed to continuing the fight. The military, the police, the settlers all are armed, and we had to deal with extreme violence from them with their arms, and none of the Palestinians with whom we were living had any arms, and we certainly did not either. We were committed to nonviolence resistance. But it was very hard. And I will also talk about how difficult it was as a Jew. All of the volunteers are Israeli, and I was the only international. Usually they're internationals from all different countries. But once the violence started on October 7th, the other internationals had left or did not come. But I have family that live in Israel. I have family who live in the settlements near Gaza, and the Israelis who were working with me also have friends and family who were killed, who were kidnapped. And to be able to hold both traumas, both horrors, both sadnesses, both sets of fear together, and not engaging in false equivalences where it's like, oh, well, they're both the same thing. They're not the same thing. They're very different histories. They're very different situations. They're different levels of threat. But when I'm sitting with the person who picked me up at the airport at her house with her before I left the next day for the West Bank, and she is crying, and she is so afraid for herself and her children because there were people from Hamas still out wandering around, and it was dangerous. We all knew it. And knowing that she slept with a knife in her hand in her bed because she was so afraid for herself and her kids is not something that I can dismiss or want to dismiss. That it is a real and an important fear, and it has to be addressed as well. And so when I talk with people, as I've talked with them for all of these years prior to this horror, there's been horrors going on since 1948. When I talk with people about dealing with it and dealing with the response that they are experiencing, whether it's in a professional setting or in personal settings, one of the things that I talk about is the need to recognize that the legitimacy of people's pain and fear on both sides of this horror, and that there is a place to say that you feel it, that you acknowledge it and are loving and supportive and compassionate for it on both sides, and not engage in saying, and they're the same thing, and I just wish that both would get along, or I just wish that, no, I'm not going there at all. But without recognizing both issues, the fear and the pain and the loss and the horror and the violence and the violations of human rights on both parts, we lose, or I lose, the ability to help move people along in the struggle and help move them towards a justice understanding of it. And that is very hard to do. It's very hard to do with activists that I work with who are singularly focused on Palestinian human rights, which is the focus of most of my work. But even as a means to an end, we who are committed to human rights, who are committed to a just peace, have got to try to figure out how to widen our compassion to understanding the challenges, the fears, and the danger and the violence that both sides are experiencing without ever slipping into these false equivalencies between the two. So I think I'll end with that. Thank you for, I guess I won't end with that. I also want to just say that I'm really sorry you're going to take hits, but if you stand up for Palestinian human rights, you're going to take hits. There's no way around it. It's like any other of the human rights struggles that have gone on here or any place else. I mean, that's why it's a struggle, as one person told me once when I was crying. I was so upset I had been ostracized from my communities. And he said to me, look, this is called a struggle and not a party for a reason. And are you ready for the struggle? And if not, get on a different bandwagon, work on a different issue. But if you're going to be working on this issue, it's a struggle, and know that you're going to get hits. So I thank you for those of you who are taking the hits. I thank you for doing it. I offer you any support that I can give you in it. We are all in this together. And it's going to be a long road. This has been going on a long time, and it's not ending anytime soon. But I really appreciate the fact that alternatives and those of you from other organizations that are standing up for this are willing to do so in the name of human rights. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, y'all grab a seat. I am going to have Xavier and Leslé come on and sit up here with me. And you guys can just introduce yourselves really quickly. And everybody, for context as well, it was Leslie's birthday last week. And so she has a little birthday present up here that we're about to pop open while we chat.
How do you?
Well, her birthday is right here, so I get to be in the middle. I like you in the middle here too.
Well, I didn't get the memo that we were using hands on face. Right. All right, I will do one. As soon
Well,
as possible.
I'll let you do that because that's yours. Can people hear us okay without the microphone? I feel like we're a little louder. No?
I think it'll be really helpful because people on the chat said it was so much better with the microphones on too.
Oh, wait, where am I? Not that bad, this is hard.
Yeah, the air is too
Okay,
loud.
okay.
Can you flip over just like make sure the room is on? Yep. You're good.
All right. All right, so we have so you want me to talk on this too? You know, that's a little bit of a challenge for me.
I know.
All right, so I'm going to turn it over to y'all. Well, since you have the microphone, go ahead.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Xavier Ramey. I serve as the founder and chief executive officer of Justice Informed. It is a social impact consulting firm based here in Chicago. I work around the country primarily with organizations that are looking for a more specific and urgent definition of equity, however that may show up as relates to gender or race or ability or indigeneity or otherwise. I look at the question of social impact and social change not through the lens of does somebody care about someone else. I look primarily through the lens of what's on paper that allows them to show that they don't care. And so we would focus primarily on the question of how we design things, how we design organizations, how we design companies, how we design boards of directors. And most of my work is around going into the design mechanics of, for instance, architecture, or whether it be a nonprofit, or whether it be a Fortune 500. And I assume that whatever it's producing for inequity is coming out of the permissions that are on the documents that created that organization, similar to the Constitution or everyday laws that we have. In the spirit of Dr. King, where he said, if a white man wants to lynch me, that's his problem, but if he has the right to lynch me, that's my problem. So we look to ensure that there's no right to create violence or to move outside of the work of equity. We do that through a lot of our clients. Day to day, most of my work civically is around police and prison abolition and around the idea and possibilities of envisioning what conflict remediation and community engagement can look like if we take the nuclear option off the table and we start to, again, reconstruct our social contracts with one another. If we think specifically about how intersectionality is a requirement of all persons, but also how repair and empowerment is requisite to the idea of community. And starting first with narratives and naming what the problems are, but then also making sure that we have an invitation. I try to speak a lot, y'all probably hear me say this a lot. I'm not a big fan of declarations. I'm not a big fan of like outright call outs. I'm not a big fan of pointing fingers. I'm not a big fan of the meanness that I see on the left or the right. I'm a fan of invitation. I'm a fan of letting people know that you have to make sure that you protect a person's right to their individuality, while also reminding them of their individual effect on the community. But we must do that in a dignified way that doesn't create more conversational or specifically interpersonal problems. And I think that our friend here I was just now occupying her seat. She was just speaking on that, and the importance of the how we go forward is just as important as what we do as we go forward.
I hate doing an introduction after Xavier. My name is Leslé Honoré. I am the CEO of Urban Gateways. Urban Gateways is Chicago's oldest nonprofit that focuses on arts access for youth. We believe that every young person in Chicago, regardless of the zip code that they live in, have a right to express themselves artistically, have a right to experience art experience, have a right to connect to each other's humanity through art. Today, primarily, I'm here not as the CEO of Urban Gateways, but as an artist. I believe in times like this, the artists that have been most impactful to me, Black women artists like Audre Lorde, Toni Morrison, or Maya Angelou, have always required us to create during these times, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when you're afraid of your truth, you speak it because someone else can't. And my legacy is a commitment to ensuring that people who look like me can continue to do that with the same freedoms that I have now, and with more so. And that we continue to build systems where they can do that, where they can express their reality and those histories, because that is how we record our humanity. The loss of life in Palestine is also the loss of the storytellers there, the poets there, the poets who will never have an opportunity to record their experience. And that is how our humanities are linked. That is how our victories are linked. That is how our sufferings are linked. That is how we have told our stories from the beginning of time. And those sometimes are the first people who are censored when we start to create about it. So that is my space, where Xavier's space is ensuring that we have the policy to keep me safe while I do it. Mine is to continue to create while he works on that as well. Is this on? Okay, there we go. I am not doing my introduction after y'all. Forget y'all. I'm the ED alternatives. We are hosting. And I feel like I cannot follow that. But I will say, one of the things is that alternatives, we have a value of liberation and equity, two of our values. And we believe that the liberation of any one of us is directly tied to the other. Our safety is intertwined. And so we wanted to create that space with that in mind. But I'm going to kick it off because, you know, when you set this event up, we thought we had so much time and it's already feeling like so little, right? I want to start with, I read this, and I mentioned this to y'all earlier. I read this article from Chronicle of Philanthropy, and it was advising folks on how to speak on this issue. And basically it said, if it's not tied to your mission, you should not talk about it. And as an organization that has spoken up on this, we have heard over and over again, y'all should not talk about this. This has nothing to do with the work that you do. And so my question to y'all is, why should we care? I'm connected to any oppressed people, regardless if we share DNA, if we share land, if we share lineage, we are connected. And it is our responsibility to, in my opinion, to live our lives in a manner that respects that. I don't know how else to put it. It's humanity. And we are struggling with that on so many levels. I think as Americans, we know how difficult it is to live with our humanity and our country's lack thereof, and how to hold those in tension. But specifically, to drill down to be a person who is Black and brown and descended from enslaved peoples and descended from indigenous peoples of the Americas, how is my history not connected to this specifically? I also know the fear that it comes from being in that space and knowing that as a single mom, my job is how I provide for my family. It is just me. And I've been speaking about Palestine for years now, and it didn't start on October 7th. And to see the switch of how people address me when I do, or the comments in the DMs, but specific to why are you speaking about this? I had someone respond and said to a person descended from enslaved people, a person who is first generation, mother is a Mexican-born woman. How dare you make these comments? Do you know what it's like to be removed from your land and not have land to go back to? Let's just let that simmer. So it's incumbent of us to inform and to educate when we have an opportunity to. I try to channel my inner Xavier and do so lovingly. Sometimes that's a bit of a struggle because it's pain and it's anger involved, and that's often what I dip my pen in when I create is pain and anger. I'm glad when there's moments when it's loving and liberating, but often it is to reflect and not let that be silenced, to be an alternate voice amongst propaganda. But is it not our human, not just right, but are we not called to speak out against inhumane moments, whether they are affecting us directly or not? When we don't, is when we are in this moment again. Because this moment didn't happen last month. It's been happening for 75 years in Gaza. It's been happening all over the world, and continued silence for our comfort leads to repetition.
I believe that we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, and that it doesn't matter what you think about that. I think that whether you agree that we are connected and our lives affect others in an increasingly economically and socially and geopolitically globalized world, as we continue to connect the fabrics of the ways in which our institutions trade with one another, the ways in which our militaries engage with one another, even cooperatively, and the ways in which the social dynamics and strategies that come from America are teaching others what oppressive systems can produce for those who own the means of production of that oppression. And because of that, we have to always have a global lens on any specific type of oppression that can be even connected a little bit to the typical tactics of white supremacy, of militarization, and of hypercapitalism. And so where a issue flares up in the world that is an attack on Black or brown people, wherever they may live, wherever they may try to be clinging to their livelihoods or their cultures, and it is an attack on the ways in which they produce their economic stability, then we cannot assume that that is so different from the ways in which we do it here in the US. Wherever in the world we see the tactics of militarized police or the military itself specifically attacking people of color anywhere in the world on behalf of a government in an economically connected world, we cannot be we cannot assume ourselves to be so special to think that this is always different. Angela Davis's she teaches us in Freedom is a Constant Struggle that we are now at a point in the history and the arc of this earth and the human experience in this current season of humanity where everything is for the most part connected. I grew up at the beginning of the age of globalization. This is after the age of industrialization, and now we're in the age of information. But the work of globalizing this world did not just connect our economies. It connected our information streams. It connected our social networks. It connected our militaries. It connected everything. And so to think that one situation or one country, and I don't mean this in any way to make small of what is happening in Palestine, but it's to say that it can't even be disconnected from what's happening in Sudan. That cannot be disconnected from what is happening in Australia. That cannot be disconnected from what is happening in Lebanon or in Egypt or in Arkansas or in Chicago. And so why speak out on Palestine? Because it is not special. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. And the tactics of terror and oppression in the globalized world are always consistent and will always produce the same thing, so long as those tactics are used with the same intention and the same defense. And so I had to speak out. I also felt the need to speak out, and why it was important specifically for me to speak out, because I know that there are people listening. And I've built a reputation here in Chicago and around the country to be respected and trusted as someone who can hold the hurt of also being a person descending from slaves, to hold the hurt of someone who's been in the city of Chicago for 100 years, my family's been here for 100 years, to hold the hurt of realizing that I am the firstborn free person in my 7 generations of my family's history in this country, to hold those hurts and to turn around and say, I got an invitation for you, to turn around and say, I think I can find the love in this, to turn around and say, I think that there's a possibility that we can, even if we are not necessarily friends, we can perhaps be partners on this liberatory movement. And so with that type of reputation, it behooves me to know that that has to extend to issues such as this, not only because it's important, but also because I was in the West Bank on October 7th, and because I saw the rockets coming towards Tel Aviv, and I barely made it out with my friends. And the reality of having a first-person experience in something like that, it's not something I can walk away from, but it also creates a unique opportunity to testify, because when we were there in the West Bank and we talked to Palestinians and we watched the very things that our sister was just talking about up here, it is true. I have studied Jim Crow. I saw it. I saw it in Jerusalem. I have read the books. I walked it in the West Bank. It's true. It's happening, and it's real. And it is hard to imagine the level of depravity that people are living under, the types of creative injustices that the Israeli government is perpetuating throughout that region, not just the West Bank, but Gaza, not just Gaza, but also in Israel proper. And the ways in which apartheid currently manifests on a day-to-day experience for everyday people who are not connected to some military office, are not connected to some political office, but even if they are, they still are subjugated if they have Palestinian ancestry. That cannot be overstated. But because I now have a personal experience, it also may create a buffer and an opportunity for those who don't, who I know a lot of you all are hearing things like, well, you shouldn't talk on it if you haven't been there. We all can hide behind me, and we can talk about it together.
I wanna, my mind is going a million places at once right now, but I wanna acknowledge something that is happening when we talk about Palestine, and if we're watching in media a lot, it's as soon as we start talking about what is currently happening in Palestine and what has happened since 1948, the question pops up, but do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn the events of 1948 or October 7th, I'm sorry. And people want to hear that you condemn anti-Semitism while having this conversation, and can't hear anything until you say those words. And so do you want to talk a little bit about what's happening there?
No, I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you brought that up. We saw that even on the Post.
Yeah.
Right, Alternatives made a post promoting this event, and we saw people coming in basically word policing Bessie specifically and Alternatives as an organization, because they did not use specifically, you didn't say Palestine in that plugger. So you're not for Palestinians. So you didn't specifically use the word genocide. You said, you're talking about war in the caption. And this isn't a war, this is a genocide, because you didn't use the word that I use. You might want to educate yourself. That's specific language that people were lodging at Bessie and the team. And I just want to speak on this is something that I think is a problem on the left right now. Let me just speak in I statements. I'm African American, right? And I don't care, let me just say specifically, this is just me. I don't care if you don't use the phrase African American and you say Black. Even when I was marching and laying my body on Michigan Avenue doing die-ins for Mike Brown. I don't care whether you name the specific neighborhood I come from, North Lawndale and Garfield Park. Even when I'm going up against when Lori Lightfoot was the chair of the police board and we're shutting down police board meetings on 35th in Michigan, and I'm screaming out to the world that our lives should matter. And I'm feeling the fact that many of my comrades, Black, brown, white, otherwise, are breaking ranks or too afraid to use specific language. I know that it's hard to use specific language in some instances because, as you said, Leslé, people have different relationships to the types of things that give them power or opportunity to even speak out on something. Their funders or otherwise. And as I've grown in my leadership, I've also grown in my sensitivity and even deepened my insistence on inviting people into the work and moving away from a lot of the language of, if you don't do it my way, you're not doing it at all. Or if you don't say exactly this, you're part of the problem. If you look at something like that and you say, these women right here are part of the problem, go somewhere else. That's my thought on it. You're missing the point. You're missing the point, and you're making an enemy out of someone you didn't even know was a partner because it didn't feel like a friend. And we are destroying generations of coalition building, of friend building, of bridge building in this moment that I think is very unique. The one thing I will say is this is what is happening right now in this war that Israel is waging on Gaza and on Palestinians. It is very unique because this is my third or fourth movement I've been a part of. This is very different, not in its importance, because it's of vital importance, but it's different in the way in which it is creating enemies within the same house. I didn't see this when I couldn't send an email that said Black Lives Matter when I was an administrator at the University of Chicago and I was told don't send anything that says Black Lives Matter. And I was like, Black Lives Matter, send. And they're like, do not talk, no administrator can talk about the trauma center. We do not approve it. And I was like, I'm gonna give the message on behalf of Black Student Union in the quad. Like, I'm here for the stuff, I'm here for the smoke. But we need to realize that everybody's way of making smoke isn't ours. And if we spend most of our time tone policing, gatekeeping, challenging publicly people who have spent years, even decades, and are generationally working on a thing, that new people who are coming into the work have all the energy and all of the ideas and all of the declarations, but they do not know the ground that they are ripping up. They do not understand the ground and the foundations and the partnerships and the resources and the safety that they are ripping up in this war through words, which isn't even the war. Our fight is not verbal. Our fight is systemic. Our fight is not about phrasing. Our fight is about colonization. Our fight is not about the question of friends. Are we friends? I don't need a lot of friends. What I need are comrades. What I need are people who aren't in my lane. I need people in political office who are able to activate, and I protect the fact that they're activating how they can while respecting the limitations of their engagement in the same ways that I do. A politician can't talk like, we're doing projects right now trying to get all the banks in the state of Illinois to adopt a singular definition for racial equity. You know how difficult it is to get JP Morgan Chase, Fifth Third Bank, Wintrust, PNC, all of these. And I'm sitting in the room over and over and over again with their heads of DE&I and procurement and all of this to get them to agree to a singular definition, framework, and measurement for racial equity, and to have folks jump in and be like, well, if you don't say it exactly this way, the whole thing's a wash. That is absolutely ridiculous when it took us since 1979 and the passage of the Community Reinvestment Act, and 1968 and the passage of the Fair Housing Act, to even get to the point in 2023 where these banks have to sit down to consider how only moving through the lens of compliance is not enough for racial justice. Now imagine somebody who doesn't look in time and doesn't see the cost, jumping in when they feel like they want to now start putting their fist up, jumping into all of that work, all of that consistency, and saying, I think it needs to have this little asterisk or this, like, go home, bro. Like, go home, please. And it's not to say that person should be dismissed. It's to say, I beg this world and the people who are progressive on the left to have more humility. Because to me, that is simply an example of a vain, prideful person who has very little experience in actual organizing, actual coalition building, and working to ensure that wherever the harm is happening, you have people in all of those sectors. We need librarians, we need janitors, we need people who got jobs, we need people who ain't got no kids and got all the time in the world. We need elders who got retirement income and they can show up and volunteer on odd hours on the weekends. We need all those people. And so we don't have the time, the space, the resources, or the flexibility to just be out here pointing out, calling out, condemning, and ensuring that everybody does it the same way. The diversity of the chaos requires a diversity in the respondents. What we are fighting is a diverse enemy. And we then must also be diverse.
I'm gonna go home now.
Yeah, this is not a competition.
No, I'm just.
I'm never competing with my people.
Never. I'm always just in awe of how you are able to articulate in a way that transcends many people's different spaces where they come to the understanding and gets to the heart of it. I wanted to speak a little bit about what content creators saw in the week or two after October 7th. Specifically because now in this age of information, what has been one of the largest galvanizing forces is our ability to see in real time what is happening on the ground. Similar to 2016, when we began to see what was happening, what Black and Brown communities have always experienced through police violence, but we were seeing it. So it was you can't deny it, because here it is. And Black people, Brown people here know that that meant nothing. I grew up in Los Angeles. My first riot was Rodney King, and we saw what happened to him in real time. However, when the attacks came to content creators who took a pause, specifically racialized and marginalized content creators whose platforms are on justice, and we took a pause before we said something. I called dear friends in the Jewish community before I posted my first poem and said, hey, can you read this with me? Can you ensure that what my heart is trying to say, it is said with clarity and honesty, and that I'm not losing my voice, and I'm respecting our coalition, but I'm staying true to what my truth is, because we knew. And ones with huger platforms in mind, were viciously attacked for not saying anything, for being thoughtful, for consulting other people, for saying, I have information, but I want to make sure I have the right information before I bring information to people who may not have any. That pissed me off. Don't rush us to create issues where if we took a moment, there would not be. So that was frustrating. What the hope in it though is, specifically as a mother of young people. So my oldest is 23, she's a teacher, an art teacher. I have a 20-year-old son and a 15-year-old daughter. The challenge I got at home was different. It was, why haven't you said anything? And I'm like, I am. You wanna read it? And it was, that's not strong enough. And it wasn't. And it was, that's not true to your voice. And it wasn't. And it was very young people calling me out on a very real fear. It's not just them I'm protecting, it's my team I have to be aware of. It's funders where I have built decades-long relationships with, and I want to keep those relationships because they are good people and they fund work that is needed. And how do you walk that and still be true to yourself is you center yourself in what is your message. The message is that of humanity. That is the challenge. So it has been so powerful to be able to see things happening in real time. So when we do have the questions for people who have not been on the ground, yes, I will stand right behind and hide behind Xavier if I need to, because he's very tall. And when I don't wear my heels, that works. But he is tall in stature and tall in knowledge and tall in solidarity. But you don't have to have been there to feel it. And that's one of the things that social media has been able to give us, is an opportunity to see and feel with immediacy, which is why one of the first things that's done to suppress that is to cut off Wi-Fi, to cut off access, to kill the truth tellers, to make sure that the journalists that are there, aren't able to share their voice, because that is where the shift happens. If we can't move you to feel, then there's no support for the work that Xavier does, because why do you feel it's relevant? So as hard as those images are, and as hard as it is to continue to see them, it is important that we don't look away. It's important that we don't seek shelter in the cowardice of our own safety, our own individualism that capitalism has told us is more important than anything else. And that's hard, because you want to lay your head down at night and close your eyes and be grateful that you are safe. And the truth is, none of us are. As brilliant as Xavier is, he's a Black man in Chicago, in America, he's not safe. Every person who identifies as a woman, we are going to walk to the street, to the cars, and to the trains and look around, and our safety is not guaranteed. And all of that is connected to the patriarchy, to white supremacy, to colonialism, and there's the thread. So it's using the tools that we have bravely is important. But to Xavier's point, if I didn't have allies that I could say, hey, I'm pissed at your people. How do I express this in a way that's not gasoline, but it's truth? How do I say for the 7 million Jewish people in the United States who have family in Israel and are not Zionists? How do I speak in solidarity with that? If you don't have that to do, similarly, when we see white allyship that is in a vacuum, that have not consulted any Black or brown people before they make a statement, we see them make the same faux pas. And we go, well, who did you talk to? Where's your arrogance that because you believe passionately, you expect yourself to also be the expert on a lived experience where you do not have any knowledge of? Where's your humility to pick up the phone? If you don't have that built in, then we perpetuate. And nothing is moved. It is just impounded.
I want to acknowledge a couple of things. So alternatives, when we released our statement, we got backlash immediately, and we lost some longtime supporters.
Is that the one you used one of my poems? It was mad about.
Yeah, one of them was mad about your poem, yes, Leslé. It actually, like, I was hurt by the loss of that support, because it was folks that I really valued as people, and we lost their support without a conversation. And when I read their emails, I could tell that their emails were rooted in pain of not feeling heard or acknowledged, because we didn't comment on October 7th. We only commented after the fact, right? And so my trauma-informed lens can see that, even though it's really challenging to have these conversations. And on the flip side, I want to acknowledge that we've potentially lost funding. We've definitely lost supporters for speaking on this issue. And I was talking to another executive director that does a lot of anti-racism work in Chicago, and she was talking about Xavier challenging her on not having made a statement. Yeah, we can talk about who it was, that's fine. Yeah, you challenged me. Not making a statement. And so she was telling me that she did an analysis of her dollars, and if her analysis is accurate and people get angry at her the way they've gotten angry at other folks, that she would have to lay off 2/3 of her staff. And she was like, our folks are also have marginalized identities, also have systemically been oppressed, and why should we have to martyr ourselves to speak on this issue? And I don't know that speaking up is the right thing for me, because I don't want to have people without jobs. And I thought that was a very interesting point to bring up, that a lot of us who are at the forefront of having these conversations, because I think that's something else that's really unique about this. People have really been leveraging their power and blacklisting folks from jobs. People have been fired, funding has been lost. Like, there is a lot of power that's being wielded right now towards folks that are speaking up in support of stopping the bombing of Gaza. And so I want to acknowledge the loss and also talk about within that, like, should you still speak up anyway? And why? And how did you get there?
Yeah, we'll talk offline, because I want to make sure that if, you know, for me, it's always about approach. It's not about saying you're not going to say anything. It's about how you do it. It's about how you do it, that you show grace, that you show love, that you show the type of love that I think, you know, as a Christian, I think it's the love of God that we have to extend to one another. You know, that like any parent, think about a parent. When their two kids are fighting, they're not like, I stand in solidarity with the one. They're hoping and praying that they both can find peace, that they don't kill each other in the process. Like, that's the approach that I take to any type of struggle, including those who would oppose me or want to destroy or divest my own community. I want love for them. I want peace and restoration for them. That's part of my abolition politic. When I lost two of my mentees this year who were shot to death in Chicago, I didn't pray for the shooters to go to jail and be buried under a prison. I prayed for their rehabilitation. And I had to deal with my heart to make sure that I wanted justice instead of vengeance. Because if I don't know the difference, I'm just going to create more of the problem. And somebody else's family is going to have to go through that. And I think that that's part of the difference and the challenge in what we're facing right now, is that people don't have an ethic of love that is powerful enough for nuanced situations and moments like this. They have paltry definitions of love that are primarily self-serving and that are primarily self-protecting. And you're right, when somebody writes something, you can hear through your trauma-informed lens that hurt wrote that email to me. Something hurt wrote that. You could hear that. The question is, can you empathize with that and sympathize that without condoning what might be the alternative, which is silence? And the reality of this type of complexity is that we are faced with this all day to practice, and in certain moments is the finals game, like right now. And some of us just ain't been hooping, we ain't been in the gym, we ain't been practices as a daily practice. And when the moment comes, we are not only unready, we are ashamed, we are embarrassed, and we pay the cost. You know, I put out I waited, I didn't speak publicly on this until I got back. So October 7th happened. I got back, I think, the 9th. We were all just trying to get out of there. Everybody was trying to get out of the West Bank, get out of Jerusalem, get out of Tel Aviv. When I got back, the types of text messages and emails and DMs that I was getting were absolutely absurd. That's why I just went dark on social media. You know, I had people, my friends had to split up, right? We're in the airport. There's no such thing as a plane that has 29 empty seats when rockets are coming. There's no such thing. But over here, in people's minds and the movies they've watched, well, all y'all should have just came home together. How come you keep, you know, this person got back this day, and this person got back 2 hours earlier, and that person got a flight, and these person, some of, 20 or so of my friends had to take the road to Jericho, through Jericho into Jordan. We had a bus full of Muslims and Black folks. That's not a safe ride when Israel immediately steps up all of its military checkpoints. And we barely got into the zone to get to the airport because we couldn't pass the checkpoint in the first place because we had a bus full of Black Muslims. But fortunately, we had one Jewish rabbi and one white woman who we put on the front of the bus. And when IDF saw them, they let us go. There's no easy solutions in hard times. And it is not that people are trying to hurt and hate. It is that there are no easy Black or white answers. I bought nearly 80 flights trying to get out of Israel. I'm still trying to get my money back because each flight was immediately, we're not taking off because no pilot wants to fly through rockets. So it's only flights that you can get out of there, the planes that are already there. But who thinks about that over here when they're sending an email to a Black man who finally lands at home, traumatized as hell, and says, "You effing coward. You left women there. They're not back, you're back," talking about your heart breaks. Your heart doesn't break for them. You left some of your people back there. Okay. That's the way you see it. Now, it's hard not to return fire.
I'm working on that.
It's hard not to return fire. It's hard not to see this is a social justice oriented person, a woman who says, I mean, it's hard not to see the perpetuated misogyny in what you're saying. That I should be the protector first. This is the reality of the time we're living in. When I came out and I needed weeks to get my, I spent the days after I got back, I've never in my life woke up day after day after day just crying. Just wake up, the moment of consciousness, tears streaming. Every video I'm looking at and watching people posting things, I can tell the difference between some things that honestly weren't true that people on our side were sharing around. Certain narratives that were more intersectional than we would have wanted because we wanted to speak quickly on a thing and show our solidarity on a thing for actual tragedies and horrors that were happening, but you don't want to fall for the okie doke and put out false information, but we have to be accountable for that. And here's the rub, when you're in leadership, you don't have a lot of extra rope before it goes around your neck because you made one mistake. Not on the left, that's a lynch mob right now. Not on the progressive left. You don't have a lot of slack. You're talking to 2 women of color and a Black man we are all leading organizations. Everyone up here is an executive right now. If we can't have sympathy for the hundreds of others who are just like us, who are trying to lead and save teams, full of people with folks just like in this room, some of y'all are in leadership as well, and have more grace to say they need to figure out how to say something. But I'm not gonna insist that they aren't my partner on this. If instead of saying, why won't you say this, we ask the question, what are you willing to say? What are you willing to say? I'm not gonna assume you're an absolute no. What are you willing to do? And present that as a question and an invitation, rather than some type of calculus based off of virtue signaling and assumptions of safety. And I wish that we had more curiosity and questions, because then we would have more peace on our side to free us up to actually imagine what the solutions could be, rather than having an entire panel right now focused on how we're destroying ourselves from within. This panel is not about solutions for solidarity. This panel is not about how do we support the people in Gaza. This panel is not right now. Bessie, you didn't convene this because we want to talk about building the coalition within the room. We're having this panel because the people within the house are killing each other. That should not occupy any amount of time in our movement, but here we are. Here we are. Here we are. That's the real of it. And we don't have to be here, but we are here. And if we would accept and appreciate that everyone is different, everyone has their own special sauce, and everyone probably knows more about their lane than you do when you talk about it. And if we could just respect that about one another, we might actually have a movement. We might actually have something that gets like, we got an election coming up next year, and we fighting here on this. We got a world that's about to boil, and we fighting here on this. That's why when I look at the bigger picture, and I took 5 weeks before I put anything out. And a lot of people said, X, what the heck? And I said, I took 5 weeks because it took me 1 week to stop crying. It took me another week to go find therapists. It took me another week to sit down and talk with my pastor about it. It took me another week to finally go to work and realize I wasn't even ready to go back. Took me another week just to start to try to find my words and decrease the anger I had about how I wasn't watching a movement of solidarity with people in Gaza. I was watching people that like yesterday couldn't say they stand for Palestine and say Happy Hanukkah at the same time. Couldn't figure out how to hold that in their heart. Happy Hanukkah. Why is that so hard? I want that type of a love ethic for them, the same reason why I want people to look at, for instance, the United States. And when I do a lot of international travel, I don't want to travel outside the US and they'll be like, as a Black man, you're supporting the work of Donald Trump. No, I'm not. Yeah. Just because he was my president at some point. That man didn't represent me. And we're treating others like that right now. And as a person who doesn't want that as a Black man and who sees the difference internally between me and Trump and DeSantis and all the rest, please don't treat me like that. And so how do I not treat others like that, including if their people are on what we would call the oppressor side?
As a leader, I'm less concerned with performative statements that we all saw during 2020. I'm more concerned at how you're taking care of your team. My job as a leader is to take care of my team, to ensure that they have the tools, the support, the knowledge to do the work that they are purposed with doing. So I don't care what you put on your website, what you put on your social media platform. Are you checking in with your team? Our first team meeting, when I worked really hard not to project my own feelings about this and not to assume that I knew where all of my team was coming from, and I just said, the world is on fire. What are we holding while we are trying to do transformative work in the city through art? We don't have an agenda. I don't want anybody's numbers. Every nonprofit that I know of is hurting. Mine's facing a $300K deficit for fiscal year 2024, which is common. It's common right now. I don't know anybody who went through Giving Tuesday and did not see the giving take a steep dive from last year. But my team are people. How are you in this moment? Do you need anything? Do you just need to be able to safely express what you feel without judgment? Do you need to ask questions? Are you curious? Is there information that you don't have? Because in these United States of America, we don't even have all the education about ourselves, let alone what our country does in our name and other places, and just the displacement that it causes and how we've received a migrant crisis is directly because of our actions, whether we knew it or not, done in our name, in our country. We don't even have that knowledge. So how do we ensure we don't shame people for not knowing the history of another place that is also connected to them? So I'm not looking at leaders of organizations, regardless of what field they're in, to give me a statement. I hope that the statements and the conversations are having within their teams. That is much more important to me than any echoing of a Black Instagram post and a rush to hire a DEI person that you've been fired 2 years later without any change.
So what this brings up for me, this is a topic that I've, similar to y'all, I cared about for years. I spent some time in Israel and Palestine in 2015. And I talked about it recently on a podcast before October 7th. I think it was sometime last year or earlier this year, where I went to Israel not knowing what the situation was. And so my mom always wants to go to Israel, Catholic. She wanted to go see where Jesus was born. And so we surprised her with a trip to go to Israel. And I get there and I hit up one of my friends who lived in Oman. And I was like, oh, I'm in Israel right now. He's like, so what are you doing in apartheid Israel? And I was like, apartheid Israel? What are we talking about? And I get to the West Bank and I see for myself what he was talking about. And in all of this backlash that we've been getting, there are so many assumptions in these comments, like, you need to go there and see for yourself. You need to educate yourself on the topic. You don't know what it's like to live in fear for your safety. My mom is a refugee from El Salvador, and I took her to Israel with me, and she was so ridiculously triggered she could not go anywhere by herself because of the military presence. Like, my mom was not okay for a while because of that. And I was in El Salvador during the Civil War, and it was very similar in terms of seeing the tanks in El Salvador, seeing the rockets in El Salvador, all of that came up, the machine guns, all of that came up for me. And we're making a lot of assumptions about folks based on these 2-second interactions. And so when we landed at a statement, and I know Xavier, you did something similar, the executive team was debating for hours on what our statement should look like. And so I had set on a scale from 1 to 10. 1 is being like, we care about all children, 10 being like, stop the genocide. What is it that we want to say? And so we decided that we were gonna convene our staff, because if there was backlash, if we have a $300,000 deficit, what jobs are on the line? it's not mine. And so we convened our staff and we went through the entire list with our staff. And we said, do you want us to speak? And if you want us to speak on that scale from 1 to 10, where do you want us to land? And our staff was very strong in that they wanted us to land at about a 7 or an 8 because our young people are Palestinian, our employees are Palestinian, and they wanted us to speak for them. And so in all of this backlash, for me, I had to represent the community that I serve. I didn't make that decision for them. I asked them what it is that they wanted from me and then they needed from me. And that's how we decided to speak up. And I don't know if you want to share about your process too.
Yeah, process and backlash. I have such an awesome team. It's taken time to get there, but I got a really dope team. I've got a great head of impact who, when I got back, you know, I called her kind of tail between my legs and just saying, like, I need you to hold it. I remember verbatim, I told her, I need you to hold the company for another week for me. And she didn't blink. And she held the company for another week in my absence. The reality is they had to, as individuals, manage their own lives, their own stakeholders, and their own people in the absence of their leader making a statement. Now, like you, Leslé, we actually have it as like a company policy. We don't make statements about things. And the name of the company is Justice Informed. And the reason why we don't make statements is because I think of it as a rat race and a hamster wheel. We don't say Happy Black History Month and the CEO is Black. We don't go through some massive marketing campaign. My thing is, and this is the challenge I present to all of my staff, if people don't know what you believe based on how you live, no statement is gonna make you come alive. And no statement is gonna protect us from what you won't live in the world that hurts our brand reputation, that hurts our sales funnels, that might create legal hazards, and destroys our credibility to do this work. And so instead of a statement, I need you to be living it and living it publicly. And that has created a lot of challenges on my team when I specifically call them in, or where I don't see them living something that they then want to go sell. And I don't know about the limitations of what HR folks would say about how that then creates a overstepping of an employer on the private lives of their employees. But it is one of the prerequisites to being a JI, to being a Justice Informed. You got to live this. And I don't even want to hire somebody who's just curious about it. I'm hiring people who are already bought in because we're not trying to do social impact. We are social impact. We're not trying to make statements. We are the living, breathing declaration of what we wish the world would do more of. And if they can't see that, then why are you here? Now, that said, I was in the same situation like you were in. I could tell that there may be some differences between what I wanted to say and what my team might think. So what I did was I simply said, yo, we had one internal conversation about it, and it went all over the place. And I said, okay, how about this? Because I felt like it was just, well, X, I think you should say this or that or these or those. I said, let's talk about democracy and empowerment. Everybody write the statement they think should go up. Just write the statement you think needs to go up. Bring that in, and we're gonna read them all together. And then we're gonna find our through line. That was risky. That was risky, but we are, our bread and butter is, I mean, we do a lot of facilitation and mediation work. So it's not like we don't know how to do that for ourselves. And so we all came to the table. And I thought I was gonna write a paragraph. I started like writing something on LinkedIn. I was like, nah, this needs to go before the team. This is the first time in 7 years of leading JI that I ever was like, I have to be more democratic about my public voice, because this is going to affect their livelihoods in a way that my other words usually don't, because of how I saw how polarizing this conversation is. They eventually, you know, we came to the table on it, and what we ended up doing was they were okay with using, I ended up writing for four pages of words. And at the end of it, we still had a lot of disagreement. But what they did agree on was that we could at least use my statement as a starting point for what the public statement looked like. I then resubmitted it to them on Google Docs and said, hey, I got the suggesting and commenting function on. Add whatever you want in the margins, but I want you to point to statements or phrasings that you unequivocally disagree with, where you're saying, hey, this is a must not. I don't feel like I can work here, and this is said, or this is not said. And I want you to put that in the margins. So we went through that round of feedback. We came to terms on everything except one thing, and it was your first thing, the condemnation of Hamas. So my experience on the ground, and this is particularly highlighted by experiences in Jericho and Bethlehem, both of which are in the West Bank. The vast majority of Palestinians I talked to had very little tolerance for or support of Hamas. It was, eventually I came to understand a little bit more, and this is, me just talking to folks is not the same thing as a population-wide survey. Just be clear on that. What was clear to me was that this was perhaps a situation that could be looked like akin to how Martin Luther King probably felt when Stokely Carmichael and the Black Panthers started picking up arms. Where he said, hey, I'm with you on Black solidarity and struggle, but the moment you start picking up these tactics, that's where I get off the train. And that is very much how I personally feel about the tactics of Hamas. That's where I get off the train. I do not and cannot, in good conscience, appreciate or support certain tactics of even self-defense or of offense and provocation, whether it be from the IDF, which I have hardly any sympathy for, or whether it be from a resistance force inside. Once the tactics go to that point, I'm with you up until that, but I can't be with you if you go there. It's similar to this nation in the US, when we pick up nuclear arms, or when we militarize the police, when the American Recovery Investment Act that Obama signed turns into the stingray devices that the police are using to surveil Chicagoans. I'm off the train on that, Mr. Obama. Not my president right now. I don't condone that. I'm not with that. And all the Democrats in the world can say, well, why wouldn't you support a Black president? I would say, because that's where my integrity ends. I don't support that type of action. And I think all of us have different points on our spectrum of integrity and tactics for that. But that became a real challenging point. And so where my team got was we realized that the root of it was a statement that I made where I said, I do not support Hamas in its tactics of terror and the ways in which it is instigating this level of brutality on Israelis, on Palestinians. And as someone said earlier, it's a very diverse region. I don't support that. And I added, and this is something that my team didn't agree with, and I don't support the Palestinians and other people who do. And that got my team into a tough conversation. Because in the social justice space, what do? We center the voices and the intended practices of those who are most affected by oppression. And those of us who are far away from it, we assume that we don't have the same stakes, so we should not have the same authority in authorizing or saying we don't agree with what people who should be self-determined say they want to happen. But therein lies the rub. We didn't find clarity on that. We didn't find agreement on that. And some of the team wanted it, some of the team agreed with me, and ultimately what I ended up doing was I kept in the fact that I don't personally support the tactics of Hamas, though I do support the self-defense of Palestinians. I support their right to self-determination. I support their right to defend themselves. But it is at the point of tactics where I get off that boat. But I did remove the statement on it, and I don't support Palestinians who do support these tactics for my team, because that's ultimately, I said, they have to live with the statement that I'm putting out. And that's not a big enough hill for me, because I think the rest of these 4 pages made it very clear what I think. But that was our internal process. Now, we've lost We had two fairly large deals in the pipeline that I was working on in the background, two six-figure deals. Both of them were lost within a week of me publishing that, specifically on LinkedIn, where the business community is at and a lot of our clients are at. I've already heard of some of the chills throughout Chicago, people who've been distancing themselves from me, professionals who are no longer recommending Justice Informed or myself, whether it be for something like I do a lot of public speaking keynotes, or whether it be for consulting services. So of course there's backlash. The question that I would say is, I was thinking of it the same way that y'all were, which was whatever backlash we get, we're gonna get. You know, when I wanted to reorganize the company last year, I cut my salary 30% and I kept everybody's salary consistent, and we're gonna get bonuses at the end of this month because I'm the CEO and I'm the leader. And that means that I gotta take the first hit, not the first cut. But the same thing is the reality when we're talking about public backlash to everybody wanting to virtue signal something without understanding how coalitions are built and how revenue supports your paycheck. That's the responsibility that we all uniquely hold, even among people who want it to be stronger. We may not be able to keep the jobs.
All right. Oh, okay. So we're at 2:30, y'all. I want to have Leslé do, you know, since I like to take advantage of the fact that we have a poet here, so I always have her do a poem. And then there are some questions that came through on the chat. There might be questions on the audience if you guys would be kind enough to stay for any questions that we have past time.
And I'll be more brief.
Okay. So we'll have Leslie's poem and then start answering some of the questions for those who want to stay for that. I love the poem moment. If he was born today, shepherds would have to look in the rubble. Rescue dogs instead of sheep would keep watch as the Christmas star was eclipsed by bombs. If he was born today, his parents would have walked south, past mothers digging toddlers' body parts out of the rocks to identify a finger, a toe, a curl with the memory of her heart. If he was born today, the angels would be heard on high weeping, Gloria in excelsis Deo. And the angels in Gaza would cry out to mothers. If he was born today, brown like he was then, persecuted today like he was then, hated today like he was then, feared today like he was then, murdered now like he was then, we would wash our hands of it like Pilate did then, and look away in the name of self-care, in the name of keeping our jobs, in the name of fear of power. While away in the rubble, no crib for his bed, if he was born today. Someday at Christmas, men won't be boys, playing with bombs like kids play with toys. One warm December, our hearts will see a world where Palestine is free.
You want to take online questions first? Yeah.
All right, so first question, is there any work whose mission is not connected with solidarity with all oppressed, colonized people? Yeah, is there any work whose mission is not connected with solidarity with all oppressed, colonized people?
Yeah, sure, Donald Trump's work. Ben Shapiro's books, Donald Trump's work, like there's a ton of work.
If this person has like a nonprofit lens specifically, because our work tends to be more mission driven.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the challenge is if you're talking about nonprofit work and social sector work, that's primarily work that's committed to protecting some group of people that is saying it experiences marginality, or another group is saying on its behalf that they experience marginality. But you think about like, you know, I think it was like by October 10th, you know, I was fielding conversations with a lot of the foundation folks here in Chicago because the Anti-Defamation League was about to dox a massive number of nonprofits who were primarily racial equity focused, Black and brown led, who were speaking out in support of Palestine, and they were gonna go to their funders and tell their funders, your people are anti-Semitic, you're funding anti-Semitism, you're funding these sorts of things, right? Like that. Now, in the same breath, like the ADL has a stated mission to ensure the protection of Jews and to reduce the probability and presence of anti-Semitism throughout America. Like that's their stated mission. And on some of the things that they do, I'm like, yeah, that's the move, that's the move, that's the move. And then there's stuff like this. There's stuff like this where they're going after the tribe. They're going after Morgan. People who are like trying to create media and press spaces that center the voices of people of color through an intersectional lens focused on liberation, decolonization, anti-militarism, and a strong critique of capitalism. And it's like, no, I'm not gonna rock with that. I'm not gonna support that, and not in one way. But the reality is that that's the challenge with like social causes. Like they're representing someone who's saying, ouch. And they're made to defend those people. I think the challenge is within the social sector. I say what I said in the beginning. I think we need to have a stronger lens for understanding the difference between someone who's not a friend versus someone who's not a partner on this versus someone who's actually an enemy. Right? Like doxing Black and brown-led nonprofits, going to their funders and putting up this banner of if you fund them, you support the destruction of Jews. I'm not with that, and I'll speak out against that all day. That's the reality, because that's not what was actually happening there. There's a rightful critique, there's a right to freedom of the press and these sorts of things. Morgan's, tribe wasn't the only group. It was hundreds of nonprofits around the country whose funding was put at risk and was being put at risk because of this. That's just one example of something that was happening. But I think that, of course, there are organizations that are against the work of supporting oppressed and marginalized people. But I think if you ask the heads of the ADL and other organizations, hell, even the Heritage Foundation would say they are fighting for oppressed people. And they are a conservative think tank that is often backing things like QAnon and backing things like Ben Shapiro and backing platforms like PragerU. Right, but they would say they're protecting a marginalized population of white folks who feel that America's not for them. I think it's a question of what side do you favor, and for me, it's how do you not have some all lives matter approach to this while not creating enemies along the way? Like still be clear on where your solidarity is at, but also be invitational to those people who are not your partner, because you might just make a new enemy.
I'll add that in putting it in a frame of what we see in Chicago specifically in Black and immigrant communities as they respond to migrant populations that are coming to the city. We get in this wheel of discussing those fine points and never getting to discussing the cause of it. As long as we stay in that space, we always gonna have a job, because we are always gonna be put in the position to represent and advocate. We have not had those conversations about what is creating this and how do we focus on that instead of focusing on policing how each one of us shows up for it.
All right, so another question. I'm in Chicago. How do I turn my online talk into action on the ground? I'm new to the radical anti-capitalism space, and I need to find like-minded organizations to out my energy into. Any suggestions?
Yeah, it's tough for me. I'm just, I'm a fan of saying I don't know something, but I don't know it. And I don't have a clear answer for that. My connection to a lot of the underground grassroots work with this issue, with this situation, and what's happening with this attack on Palestinians and such. Like I don't have a lot of networks in that. What I will say is general practice is if you are online and you're seeing these groups, reach out to them. But reach out to the one that fits the type of work that you agree with, the type of integrity that you hold as well, and that also has a need for your support. A lot of times these organizations get over. Like when I was one of the co-founders of the Let Us Breathe Collective, and when you start something that's very catalytic and everybody's watching it and it's in the moment of a movement's eye, you can just get flooded. You don't have a director of outreach. You don't have a manager of volunteer services. Like it's a bunch of volunteers themselves, like 4 people who had an idea and are up for 30 hours out of 24 every day.
I do not have an answer for that.
Okay. So this is a two-part question. What do you think is the long-term repercussions of word policing people in times like these? Being in racial equity DEI, I have seen people withdraw and hold back their creativity just so they don't say the wrong thing. On one hand, it's smart to think before speaking, but at what point does it restrict our work?
We lose solidarity, we lose momentum, we lose power that organizing tells us that cannot be created by one individual. The shift does not happen because of an individual, which is why capitalism wants us to focus so much on our own individual needs and success, because that is not where the revolution comes from. And fear. We've talked a couple of times about being thoughtful before we speak. I want us to get to a point where we can honestly speak about why we are being thoughtful. Where we can directly connect that line to where the power lies and how do we dismantle that? Because there should be no power that prohibits us from telling the truth.
What was the first question?
What do you think is the long-term repercussions of word policing people in times like these?
Yeah, I think I've spoken on that. You're building enemies out of people that could be your partner. Word policing is not the fight. It's not. That's not the point. And I think part of the challenge, I will dig into this just a little bit. The reality of the challenge of creating psychological safety in nuanced intersectional conversations about oppression is really hard. And a lot of times the reason that I think the person said like they've been in DEI conversations and people are shutting down their creativity. They're like pulling back, not saying anything, but that also might be like a brilliant person who normally, if they felt safe to speak, they would say something. I think part of this is like the difficult, because I do a lot of DEI work professionally, like this is the hard thing about safe spaces. As a proponent and advocate of them, I also recognize the inherent challenge in this word safety actually being broader than most people are giving it credit for. When, for instance, like I've seen, people who are men in workplaces shut down because a woman says, I don't feel safe in this conversation. Now, what she may mean is, I don't feel psychologically safe having a conversation about how sexism shows up here. But any man in that room may then say that, like, hey, if the chief HR officer and a legal officer are in here, and a person who identifies as a woman is saying, in a workplace, I don't feel safe around men, that is a legal hazard. I can not only lose my job, I can lose my livelihood and otherwise. If we were more clear about what we actually meant, when we said, like, I don't think that the words that are being used create an invitation and a space for more robust conversations about the ways in which verbal harm is being perpetuated in this space, specifically towards me, that's very different. That's very, like taking your time and explaining what you're feeling and what's happening, that makes a difference. Not only difference to the person, if you're having these conversations at work, it makes a difference in whether it's possible to have these conversations at work. Because leaders are responsible for protecting people. They're responsible for protecting people. And when people use general language like safety, I feel unsafe, or this feels violent, that has all types of implications. All types of implications. And to casually use that and then be upset when nobody's responding, I think that shows like, hey, I don't think you really understand the effect sometimes of not being specific. Now, the challenge with that is it puts the onus on a person who's experiencing harm to go through the labor of figuring out their words in the moment, figuring out their emotions and turning it into a verbal invitation. Like that's a lot. That's a lot. The challenge is that's where we're at. Like I, as an African-American person, have been in a lot of microaggressive white environments, but I also recognize that if I want them to engage, I got to do a little bit of the step forward. And I think in those professional workplace conversations when we're talking about this stuff, if we want to have these conversations at work, there's a greater rigor that we're going to have to apply to it if we want to have it at work. You want to have this conversation in your living room with a bunch of folks, cool, do your thing. There's no HR officer, no legal, you ain't got no employment contract. Ain't nobody can fire you, go for it. But you gotta understand that if you're trying to have these conversations at work, it takes more than how you have these conversations when you're on your own.
Back to social media. Something that social media has created is a space where we think everything we think needs to be shared. And it doesn't. Some of us are lucky to be in workspaces that we've helped cultivate that are safe and brave, and we want our team to be able to bring and speak stuff there so we can help support them. But the truth of the matter is, everything should not happen there. There are conversations that we are gonna have when the mics are off that will be different than any conversation I will ever have publicly. Because that's my business. And being an adult is knowing how to separate that.
All right, we can take questions from the audience, right? If anybody has any.
For the panelists, if you repeat the question before you answer it.
Rendell Solomon, why do you think this particular issue, first of all, thank you for the panel discussion, it's been awesome. Why do you think this particular issue is so polarizing? Is it ignorance, is it fear, is it pain, is it malice? Why does this one create such diametrically opposed reactions to two people looking at the exact same, air quotes, situation?
Yeah.
Neighbors, right? I want this one.
Yeah, put me in, coach. So I think there's a couple things here. Yes. So why does this specific conversation around Palestine and Israel and Hamas and the IDF and Gaza, and why is this so polarizing and so challenging in this moment? I think it's for several reasons. One, in the American context, we have had generations of non-conversation, generations of silenced discussion and investigation, generations of ensuring the demonization of people who spoke up or spoke about what is happening right now in the West Bank or in Gaza and Israel or otherwise. Like, we have had generations of investment, sort of like so I'm like a socialist running a for-profit company right now, which is a little weird. I know in the background, understanding how socialism became a boogeyman was not just because it was like Russia and China. It was also because we removed the ability for teachers to teach about it. I have a degree in economics. You know that, Rendell, because you're in finance, right? I have a degree in economics. They didn't teach me much about non-capitalist models for financial management. I had to teach myself that after getting a sociology ethic that was focused on not creating financial problems while I'm creating financial profit, right? Like, I had to make that up, right? But there's an active campaign that has existed for generations now, 2 generations now, to ensure that there's no blueprint, that there's no comfort, that there's no safety for talking about it. The same thing I think is true about the rights of Palestinians and what is happening, what I saw in the West Bank. I thought I knew. I thought I knew. I thought I knew. I had no idea. I couldn't imagine. And it was a failure of imagination that I was confronted with. Now, here's the second challenge. You're talking about 2 groups of people who each themselves see themselves as, and I believe actually are, marginalized and oppressed in some way around the world. Right? You have people of Jewish ancestry who there was an actual Holocaust. 6 million people were gassed or burned alive or shot to death. There were actual tactics that were perpetuated against an entire group of people, not just in 1939 to 1945. Before that, hundreds of years before that, a scattered nation traveling around the world looking for safety. And that's no accident. And anti-Semitism is real. You have the reality of, that's the second thing. The third thing is you have this question of geography and the question of rights. Every American right now who has a hard opinion about the rights of Palestinians needs to think what would happen if even in the Chicago region, if the Council of the 5 Tribes said, we want land back now, what does every Black real estate developer in South Shore want to do? How would Black people want to adjudicate the question of solidarity with Indigenous people as they talk about the importance of land acknowledgements? We could have the same situation here, and our lack of rigor and love ethic wouldn't give us the easy answers we're saying are so easy right now for someone else. And that's within the Black community. As a Black man, I'm saying, I'm looking at my own people and we ain't got it. I'm looking at the migrants, like people who are coming up from Venezuela, countries that the US has instigated coups and bombings and all types of stuff. We got Black folks like, y'all take it from us, who have righteous anger in a country we have been resisting for 400 years. So the third thing is the complexity of land and space and safety and the interconnectedness of our stories. And the fact that justice delayed is justice denied, and some of us have had justice delayed for centuries. This is part of the challenge. And then the fourth thing I'll say is the lack of education that a lot of people have had about this situation. Man, when I got there, bro, I heard the name Salahuddin so many times. I ain't never heard Salahuddin outside of that movie, City of God, right? Like I didn't understand how important some of these historical figures, these kings, these emperors, these princesses, these queens were to Arab populations, and the ways in which that created not only their understanding of their culture, but their right to land, but also served as a marker in time for the fact that they were there. And then you've got people like, stuff that's going up now, right? Like, how y'all saying Jews weren't here when Jesus was born in Bethlehem? How can you say we weren't here? And you have this uneducated, unprepared American country now jumping into a conversation, wanting to act like everybody knows everything for types of solidarity and issues of geopolitical violence that if it were in our own house, we wouldn't know how to resolve.
Does anybody else?
I think we're good, thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks, Sean.
All right, there's food, there's drinks, have at it, y'all.
What about that?